Hαίrete, friends. Welcome to Classics in Color, your weekly dive into some of the ancient world's wackiest facts. I'm Mark Graves, and today we're going to be talking about aging in the ancient world, what it meant, how people tried to prevent it, and how people treated the elderly. Let's get started. This video would not be possible if I hadn't stumbled across the excellent article, which unfortunately has a bit of a mouthful of a name. It's entitled Evolving Views of Aging and Longevity from Homer to Hippocrates, Emergence of Natural Factors, Persistence of the Supernatural. Like I said, a bit of a mouthful, but it's excellent. And the author is Caleb Finch. So from this article, we learn that views around aging changed over time. Go figure, right? So if we look as far back as we can go, at least in the written record, say we look at Homer and Hesiod, we have different views than we get later. So Homer and Hesiod seem to not count human lifespan in years. And it seems like that was the standard practice whenever they were writing, that people just didn't really keep track of how many years they had been alive. They mostly just differentiated by stage of life. So infancy, childhood, puberty, etc. You didn't really count by years. And it doesn't change all at once. It's more of a slow evolution. So slowly over time, people became more interested in standardizing all kinds of things. So as the Greek and then Roman empires grew, you see pressure to standardize things like the calendar. So people want everyone to be on the same page of how many months are there, when do they start, that kind of thing. You see standardization in weights, in units of measurement in construction, in coinage, etc., etc. And along with that pressure to increase standardization, people start to keep track of their birth year and then to count how many years they've been around. So you see that change over time. Also, if you look back really early, there's this mindset that you can't postpone aging or death at all, that just the fates have decreed when you're going to die, and that is it. So not only can you not increase the amount of time you're going to live, but you also can't increase the quality of life when you get old. You're just old and you have to live with that. I am obviously no scientist, but from what I understand, the current thought or the current understanding is that how you age is only determined by your genetics about a third. The other 2/3 has to do with your environment, your diet, how much stress and pressure are you under, all that good stuff. So the current thought is that only a third of your aging is determined by fate, and the rest of it you have a little bit of wiggle room with. And obviously there are a lot of people now spending a lot of effort and money influencing and optimizing that 2/3. And you start to see that mindset emerge a little bit in the ancient world as well. They definitely had the idea that certain climates were better for one's health, would help you be healthier and live longer. But their real interest was in diet. Medical writers in the ancient world are obsessed with diet, and you can get an idea of how important they thought diet was if you think about the gods. How do they live forever? How do they stay young and healthy forever? It has to do with their diet. Their diet is key. The fact that they eat that nectar and ambrosia and they don't eat human food. They don't consume bread and wine. They have their own special diet that makes them special like they are. And so medical writers as early as Hippocrates spend a lot of time talking about what you should eat and what you shouldn't eat and maximizing it for your particular makeup. To give you an example of how important they thought dieting was to the aging process, let's take a look at a rather long but very interesting passage from the Greek historian Herodotus that compares two cultures and their typical diets. The Ethiopians asked what the Persian king ate and the longest lifespan of a Persian man. They said that he ate bread, related how the wheat was grown, and set 80 years as the longest lifespan for a man. The Ethiopians replied it was no wonder they survived only a few years if they subsisted on dung, and that they would not have been able to live even that long if they did not restore themselves with wine. As he made this remark, he pointed to the wine, for at least in this respect he admitted his own people were inferior to the Persians. The Persians in turn asked the king about the lifespan and diet in his country. He told them that most of his people lived at the age of 120 years, and some even surpassed this age. They ate boiled meat and drank milk. When the Persians were amazed at this lifespan, they were led to a spring which smelled of violets, and the liquid was so light that nothing could float on top, wood or anything lighter than wood. This liquid, if it truly is as described, then their constant use of it must be why they are so long-lived. So obviously that passage is comparing the Persians and the Ethiopians. The reference in there to them eating dung has to do with the fact that the Persians were actually starting what was then a fairly new technique of fertilizing their fields with manure. So very effective, but if you weren't familiar with that process, it would understandably seem pretty weird. So that's what is going on there. And then the Ethiopians claim that they can live to be 120 or more because they have this special diet of milk and this fancy, super healthy spring water, right? Now, the 120 years is most likely a bit of a tall tale. Herodotus is known for those. Elsewhere, he actually says about the Ethiopians that their semen is black. So you can take everything here with a bit of a grain of salt. Science also confirms that it's almost impossible that anyone in the ancient world lived to be 120. But what we want to take away from this passage is not that anyone lived to be 120, but just the fact that people in the ancient world considered diet to be the key, to be crucial to the aging process. In addition to diet, people in the ancient world would also sometimes make a connection between morality and aging well. And this is something that humans actually do across cultures. We like to equate youth and beauty and health with being moral, which is not scientific at all, but it is a very human association to make. And I actually have a quote from Pindar making this association. So he says, "From labors born in youth and with justice, life becomes gentle toward old age. Let him know that he has received marvelous happiness from the gods." Finally, let's take a look at how people treated the elderly in the ancient world. It actually varied quite a bit depending on the time and location that you're looking at. So we're going to look at a couple different examples, starting off with Athens in the 5th century. So in this time period, there were a lot of laws passed that had to do with one's obligation to the elderly. So sons were legally obligated to provide their fathers with food, housing, protection from any kind of violence or assault, and they also had to pay for their funeral. And if anybody refused or neglected to do these things, they could be punished by having their citizens' rights revoked. And in ancient Athens, that was a huge deal. Being a citizen came with all kinds of privileges and social status. You really did not want to lose that. So that's a pretty severe penalty. So therefore you can see that taking care of the elderly was a big deal. If we stay in Athens, but we go back even further, we actually get one of the first instances of elder care being mentioned in any civic code. So there was a law written by Solon that basically said a son would not be obligated to take care of his father if his father had not taught him a trade. So basically, if a father hadn't equipped his son to be able to provide for himself, he couldn't legally expect or require that son to take care of him in return. Finally, I have saved the most shocking example for last. We again turn to Herodotus, who tells us about an ancient Central Asian culture. He calls them the Mazagetai, and allegedly they ate their grandparents. Whenever someone grows very old, all his relatives assemble and sacrifice him together with some sheep. Then, after stewing the meat, they feast on it, believing this to be the most blessed way to end one's life. If someone dies from an illness, they do not eat his flesh. So presumably they wouldn't eat the sick grandparents to avoid getting sick themselves, although Herodotus also apparently says that another culture, the Padaioi, which lived in the Far East, would only eat the sick grandparents. They wouldn't eat the healthy ones. So again, you see wide variety across cultures. Thank you so much for checking out this video. If there are any grandparents in the audience, let the rest of us know. We're curious, what are your thoughts on being eaten at your funeral rather than buried or cremated? What are the pros and cons there? Special thank you, as always, to subscribers and to Patreon members. I hope to see all of you again next week. Chαίrete.